20 doctors laughed at the new nurse with trembling hands. In Norfolk's busiest trauma bay, they called her fragile, slow, unqualified. But when a wounded Navy SEAL commander was rolled in bleeding out, barely conscious, he didn't look at the surgeon running the room. He looked past the titles, past the noise, and saluted her. Have you ever been judged for one thing your body couldn't hide? A shake, a stutter, a scar. The kind of small weakness people use as permission to dismiss everything else about you. Ava Caldwell knew that feeling. Fluorescent lights overhead, cold tile underfoot, laughter that never sounds loud, just permanent. Stay to the end and you'll see how quiet competence survives chaos, corruption, and a hunt that comes from inside the building. Because the salute was only the beginning. Like the video comment where you're watching from and don't look away. The salute didn't belong in a civilian trauma bay, and that was why it cut so deep. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition, the kind that reaches past uniforms and job titles and lands on something older than this room. 3 weeks earlier, Ava Caldwell stood outside Tidewater Trauma Center with the Atlantic wind carrying salt up Granby Street and the distant thrum of shipyard engines under the morning quiet. Norfolk was still dim streetlights reflecting off wet pavement, and the glass front of the hospital caught the first pale streaks of sunrise like a blade catching light. Ava's ID badge hung from a fresh lanyard that still felt too stiff against her neck. Her scrubs were new, the fabric crisp in a way that made her feel exposed. She shifted her tote bag higher on her shoulder and felt the tremor start in her fingers, fine and relentless, as if her hands were trying to speak a language she refused to translate. She curled them into a fist, then opened them again, then pressed her thumb to the inside of her wrist, where the pulse beat steady and real. In through the nose. Hold. Out slow. Count it. 4 in. 4 hold. 6 out. She didn't do it because she was afraid of the hospital. She did it because stillness was when the shaking got loudest. The lobby smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. A janitor pushed a mop across the marble, with the bored rhythm of a man who had seen every kind of emergency and learned to stay out of the way of all of them. A big screen above reception looped cheerful hospital branding over footage of smiling nurses that never looked tired. Ava walked past it and kept her eyes forward, watching reflections in the glass for anyone approaching behind her out of habit she tried not to name. At the nurses' station on the trauma floor, the charge nurse looked up from a clipboard and assessed Ava in one long glance. Brenda Holt had a sharp bob of graying hair and the posture of someone who could stand through a 12-hour shift without ever truly sitting down. Her eyes were tired, but clear. "You're Caldwell," Brenda said. "Yes, ma'am. Call me Brenda. If you call me ma'am, I'll start acting like one." Brenda's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You worked ER before." Ava nodded. 2 years. Richmond. Brenda glanced at her hands as Ava reached for the orientation packet. The tremor flashed subtle but undeniable. Brenda's eyes didn't widen. She didn't pity. She just filed it away. "This place doesn't slow down for anybody," Brenda said. "You keep your head, you keep your hands busy, you'll be fine. You freeze. You become a problem someone else has to solve." Ava kept her voice even. "I don't freeze." Brenda's gaze lingered one extra beat as if testing the sentence for truth, then she motioned toward the double doors. "Come on." Morning huddle. The trauma floor was waking up. Monitors chirped their constant reminders. Oxygen hissed. Nurses moved with tight efficiency, snapping gloves on checking suction, wiping down rails. The physicians arrived in clusters, white coats over scrubs, stethoscopes looped like status symbols, voices loud enough to fill space before anyone else could. Dr. Grant Mercer walked in like the building had been designed around his stride. He was tall, well-groomed, and comfortable in attention. The residents straightened without being told. A few nurses looked up with that half-second of readiness people develop around a man whose approval can make or break a shift. "All right," Mercer said, clapping once. "Let's keep it clean today. No surprises." Ava stood at the edge of the group, holding her clipboard with both hands. She felt the tremor start again, and she adjusted her grip until the plastic didn't rattle. Mercer's eyes found her as if he'd been waiting for it. His gaze dropped to her fingers. "New face," he said. "Who are you?" "Ava Caldwell." "New RN." Mercer's eyebrows lifted. "Hands always do that?" he asked, loud enough for the semicircle to hear. Ava could have lied. She could have joked. She chose the simplest truth. "Yes, doctor." Mercer smiled as if he'd been given permission. "Trauma nursing is a contact sport, Caldwell. Try not to drop anything important." The laughter was casual, practiced the kind that told her this would be easy entertainment for them. Ava nodded once, because any other reaction would be fed back later as proof she didn't belong. Brenda's voice cut in. "We good?" Mercer shrugged, already moving on. "Sure, just making introductions." The huddle broke. People scattered toward rooms and computers and supply closets. Ava followed Brenda to the med room where the smell of alcohol wipes was sharp enough to sting. Brenda handed her a set of keys. "You're on Trauma 2 today. Pair you with Lauren. She's solid." Lauren Miller was a nurse with a ponytail pulled tight and eyes that flicked constantly to the clock. She shook Ava's hand quickly, like she didn't want to commit to the interaction. "Hey," Lauren said. "We're slammed already, Isai. Just follow my lead." Ava nodded. "Got it." They moved through initial rounds, checking lines, verifying orders, printing labels. Ava's hands shook when she held the chart. They steadied when she touched a patient. On her first shift, a teenager came in after a motorcycle crash, pale and furious, trying to rip the oxygen mask off his face. His mother cried in the corner, pleading, making everything worse without meaning to. The resident barked commands, and the kid fought harder. Ava stepped to the bedside without asking permission. She didn't crowd him. She didn't raise her voice. "Hey," she said low and firm. "Look at me. Not them. Me." The boy's eyes snapped to hers. "I can't breathe." "You can," Ava said. "You're panicking and that's making it feel tight. Breathe with me. In, out." He mirrored her one shaky breath, then another. His hands stopped clawing at the mask. In the hallway later, the resident Dr. Evan Price smirked at Ava's hands as she wrote her note. "Careful," he said. "Your handwriting's gonna look like an EKG." He said it with a grin, like it was friendly, like it was harmless. The nurses nearby laughed because the resident laughed. Ava kept writing until the note was complete. By the second day, people stopped calling her Ava. They started calling her Caldwell. It wasn't official. It was a way to keep distance. In the break room, two doctors sat with their backs half-turned as she walked in. One of them, Dr. Vanessa Lane, glanced up and leaned toward the other. "That's her," Lane murmured, not quiet enough. The shaky one that the other asked. Lane's eyes flicked to Ava's hands as Ava reached for a paper cup. "Yeah." Ava filled the cup with water instead of coffee. Her hands shook worse when she tried to hold something hot. At the nurse's station, Mercer passed behind her, close enough that his coat brushed her shoulder. He paused at her screen and scanned the chart she was reviewing. "You're behind," he said. Ava didn't look up. "I'm verifying the dose." Mercer exhaled dramatically. "Of course you are. We'll all grow old waiting for you to feel ready." A nurse laughed. Another looked down at her keyboard and pretended not to hear. Ava felt the tremor in her fingers ease as she clicked through the medication record, confirming weight renal function timing. She found a mismatch. Not lethal immediately. Worse than that. The kind of error that would start slow and unravel a patient quietly while everyone blamed their age or their comorbidities. She flagged the order in the system. She called pharmacy. She corrected it. The patient received the right dose. No one clapped, no one knew. That night, she rode the elevator down alone, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Her hands trembled so hard, her body fob clicked against her badge. She pressed her fingers to her thigh until it stopped. The next morning, he arrived early. The sun was barely up. She liked the hospital before the noise when the hallways were empty and she could move without eyes on her. She walked the back corridors, memorizing turns the way she memorized medication drawers. A locked door near radiology. A stairwell that bypassed the main lobby. A service elevator that took longer but didn't open onto public floors. A supply closet that could hide a person if the lights were off. She told herself it was just good practice. She told herself she was being thorough. A few nurses offered her sympathetic looks that never became conversation. One of them, a new grad with tired eyes, opened her mouth once as if to ask about the tremor, then shut it when Mercer rounded the corner. Ava understood the calculation. In this place, being kind could cost you. She kept her own kindness small and practical. She carried extra alcohol wipes in her pocket and handed them to Tex without comment. She refilled the blanket warmer when it was low. She wrote down which families needed updates and quietly reminded residents who forgot. When she finally sat down to chart, she locked her elbows close to her ribs, anchoring her hands until the shaking softened into something she could hide. Over the first week, Mercer's jokes became a kind of soundtrack. Not always directed at her, sometimes aimed at the room with her as the punchline. On day 3, Ava was sent to a trauma room to assist with a laceration repair. The attending on call, Dr. Simone Hart, flicked her eyes to Ava's hands as Ava laid out sutures. "Are you going to be able to hold a needle driver?" Hart asked, voice flat. Ava aligned the instruments, yes. Hart's smile was thin. "Good. I'm not sewing this man twice." The resident beside her snickered. No pressure. Ava didn't look up. She opened the suture pack, anchored it, and handed it over palm steady. The tremor stayed in the background while her eyes tracked the wound edges. By the end of that week, it wasn't just Mercer. It was a rotation of white coats who took turns testing her. An anesthesiologist asked if she needed someone to carry her syringes. A hospitalist patted her wrist and called her sweetheart. An ER attending she had never met told Brenda casually, "Keep her away from the trauma heads if you want clean numbers." None of it was loud enough to report. It was loud enough to shape the room. One afternoon, Mercer stopped at the nurses' station while 3 residents hovered behind him. He picked up a chart Ava had just signed and held it up. "Caldwell," he called, voice carrying. "Your signature looks like you did it in an earthquake." A couple of nurses laughed reflexively. A resident tried to hide a grin. Ava stood and took the chart back without snatching. "The patient name is legible. The date is correct." Mercer's eyebrows rose. "Listen to you. Philosophy and penmanship." The residents followed him away, and one of them, Malia Brooks, glanced back with a grin that said shaky without using the word. Ava returned to her screen and kept typing until the heat in her face faded. That same shift, an elderly man needed an IV restart. He was dehydrated veins, flat skin, thin. Lauren hesitated at the bedside and glanced at Ava with a look that dared her to try. Ava cleaned the site, tied the tourniquet, and felt her fingers tremble as she positioned the catheter. The man watched her. "Your hands okay?" he asked. Ava met his eyes. "They are." Flashback, smooth. She threaded the catheter and secured it. Tape down. Flush. Patent. Her hands were steady the entire time. The man smiled faintly. "Looks like they know what they're doing." Back at the station, Mercer glanced at the chart. "Who started that line?" "I did," Ava said. Mercer made a show of surprise. "Well, miracles do happen." During a code later that week, Ava reached for the crash cart medication tray, and her hand trembled as she lifted a syringe. Mercer saw it and made a show of concern. "Someone else take that," he said. "I'd like the epinephrine to go into the patient, not the ceiling." The resident snatched it from her hand. Ava didn't fight him. She moved to the next task, chest compressions, where rhythm mattered more than steadiness. Her hands didn't shake when she pushed down. They found the cadence and held it. By the second week, the avoidance was worse than the jokes. Nurses stopped pairing with her for tasks that required teamwork. They didn't say why. Being seen with her meant being seen as slower, less confident, less trusted. In the second week, someone misplaced a medication lockbox key. The floor went tense, more about blame than safety. A senior nurse pointed at Ava. "Caldwell had the keys last," she said. Heads turned. Eyes landed on Ava's hands like shaking fingers were evidence. Ava kept her voice neutral. "I signed them back at 09:05. Check the log." They checked. Ava was right. The key later turned up in a resident coat pocket. No one apologized. Brenda only sighed and handed Ava a fresh patient list. "Go." Ava went where she was needed. She checked vitals. She reset monitors. She cleaned blood off rails. She calmed families. She watched the physicians more than they realized. Mercer liked speed. He liked decisive language. He cut people off mid-sentence and called it efficiency. He praised residents who spoke loudly and moved fast, even when they missed details. Ava noticed the pattern. She noticed which nurses corrected those misses quietly, fixing documentation, catching allergies, rechecking labs. The work that kept patients safe never made a dramatic sound. She became one of those quiet corrections. One afternoon, a patient was ordered medication with a unit error that would have made the dose 5 times too strong. The resident who entered it had been awake for 20 hours and didn't notice the decimal slide. Ava noticed. She printed the order, compared it to the weight, checked the last lab values, and walked to the workstation where Dr. Price sat. "Dr. Price," she said. He looked up, impatience already forming. "Yeah." Ava held the paper steady with both hands. "This dose is off. It's entered in the wrong unit." Price blinked, then scoffed. "No, it's not." Ava didn't move. "Please look again." Across from him, Malia Brooks snorted. "Caldwell's auditing today." Price clicked back into the chart. His grin faded. He corrected it without meeting her eyes. Brooks leaned back, smiling. "You ever stop shaking long enough to relax, Caldwell?" Ava looked at Brooks, calm. "I relax at home." She walked away, leaving them uncertain whether to laugh. At lunch, Mercer walked in mid-laugh with a group of physicians and nodded toward Ava like she was part of the decor. "Caldwell," he said, "you ever try meditation? Might calm those hands." Ava looked up. "I breathe plenty." Mercer chuckled. "Just don't hyperventilate in the middle of a chest tube." The table laughed. Ava returned to her notes until the numbers steadied in her vision. Late that week, a respiratory patient rolled in, rapidly deteriorating. The room filled with that thin edge of panic people tried to hide. The resident fumbled with settings. The patient's wife clutched her purse like it could stop the oxygen from falling. Ava stepped to the wife first. "Ma'am, I need you on this side of the bed." The woman blinked. "Is he dying?" Ava kept her voice even. "He's working too hard to breathe. We're helping him. I need you where you can see him without getting in the way." The wife moved, anchored by Ava's tone. Ava adjusted the mask seal and leaned to the resident. "He's tiring out. He needs support now." Brenda heard it and moved in, voice sharp. "Respiratory now. Stop arguing." The patient stabilized enough to transfer. The wife whispered thank you to Brenda. Ava washed her hands and stepped back into the current of the floor, unnoticed again. That invisibility wasn't always a loss. It was cover. It let her move through the system without anyone tracking her decisions too closely. One morning, Mercer found her in the supply room, reorganizing the airway cart. She hadn't been told to. The drawers were a mess, different sizes, mixed labels peeling. Mercer leaned in the doorway, amused, trying to earn a gold star. Ava kept sorting, trying to find things quickly when we need them. Mercer stepped closer and watched her hands as she reached for tape. "They still doing that?" he said. Ava placed the tape down carefully, then met his eyes. "Yes." Mercer smiled. "You ever wonder if you're in the wrong line of work?" Ava's chest tightened. She answered anyway. "No." Mercer's smile widened like she'd challenged him to a game. "Confidence matters as much as competence." Ava went back to the cart. "Then you should be doing fine." The words were calm, not loud, but they landed. For 1 second, Mercer's expression stalled. Then he laughed, sharp and humorless, and walked away. After that, the jokes gained a new edge. Not because Ava had insulted him, because she hadn't feared him. In Mercer's world, not fearing him was a kind of disrespect. At the end of her 3rd week, the label had fully formed. Shaky hands, slow, soft-spoken, too cautious. The kind of nurse you keep out of the way when things get real. Ava heard it all. She stored it and moved on. Wednesday night, she parked in the same spot and sat in her car with the engine off. The hospital behind her glowed with lit windows like a ship at sea. She rested her hands on the steering wheel. They trembled. She breathed until they calmed. Inside, she had a routine. Arrive early, check supplies, touch base with Brenda, review charts. Walk the hallways once, not because she was lost, but because she liked to know what had changed since the last shift. Thursday morning began with that routine. The trauma bays were clean and restocked. The radio on the wall murmured through static between dispatch calls. Nurses complained about weak coffee. Someone laughed about a resident who had slept through his alarm. Ava checked in at the nurse's station, scanned her assignment, and washed her hands with slow precision. The tremor faded as soap slicked over skin and her mind settled into task. Brenda walked by clipped and focused. "You good?" Ava nodded, "Yes." Across the floor, Mercer arrived in stride, already mid-conversation, already occupying space. He glanced at Ava's hands, smirked, and kept walking. Ava turned back to her charting. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, steady enough that the keys didn't rattle. The hospital air held its usual hum, monitors blinking, doors opening and closing, and the dispatch radio whispering softly through static. The dispatch radio whispering through static was easy to ignore when the floor was calm. It sounded like background noise, the kind you stop hearing after enough shifts. Ava heard it anyway. Thursday mornings at Tidewater had a deceptive softness to them. The early rush was done, the worst of the overnight backlog had been cleared, and the trauma bays sat clean and waiting like stages with the props reset. Sunlight filtered through high windows at the far end of the hall, turning the polished floor into a pale mirror that showed every scuff, every drop of dried saline, every footprint. It was bright in a way that made people feel safer than they should. At the nurse's station, someone complained about the coffee again. "It tastes like somebody rinsed a boot," Lauren said, pouring it anyway. A tech named Jamie shrugged. "Caffeine is caffeine." Brenda Holt moved through them with a stack of papers and the pace of someone who did not believe in calm. Her eyes swept the board, the rooms, the faces. She saw gaps before they formed. She saw the edges of problems that other people only noticed when they were already bleeding. Ava checked her assignment list and wrote the room numbers with careful, neat strokes. Her hands trembled faintly as the pen touched paper, just enough to leave a slight wobble in the line. She anchored her wrist against the counter and kept going. Lauren watched her for half a second, then looked away, like noticing was an opinion she did not want to own. Ava started rounds the way she always did, quiet and methodical. She verified oxygen flow meters, checked suction canisters, ran her fingers along the cords to make sure nothing had been unplugged, and shoved back behind a machine in the name of tidiness. She listened to the beeps and the pauses between beeps. She noticed when a monitor alarm chirped too often, not because the patient was worse, but because the sensor was sitting wrong on skin. In room 9, an older man with a heart history stared at the ceiling like he was counting tiles. His chart said he was stable. His breathing said otherwise. Ava stepped to the bedside and watched his chest rise. It was shallow and fast. His lips were dry. "How you doing?" she asked. He turned his head slowly. "Fine." People said fine when they did not want to be trouble. Ava did not argue. "Any chest pressure?" "No." "Short of breath?" He hesitated, a little. Ava adjusted his position with a hand at his shoulder, moving him a few degrees upright. She did it like she had done it 1,000 times, with a calm that gave the patient permission to relax. She checked his oxygen saturation. 91. Not terrible. Not right. She looked at the monitor leads and saw one sitting loose. She reset it. The tracing smoothed. He exhaled. "Feels better." Ava nodded. "I'm going to tell the doctor you're working harder than you should." He frowned. "I don't want to stay." Ava kept her voice gentle. "Then we fix it fast." In the hallway, she caught Dr. Evan Price outside a workstation. He looked tired in that controlled way residents wear like armor. He was staring at a lab panel and frowning as if he could intimidate the numbers into changing. Ava stopped at his shoulder. "Room 9. Mr. Hollis. He's breathing fast. Oxygen is low. Leads were loose, but he's still short of breath." Price barely looked up. "He's on my list." Ava did not move. "He needs eyes sooner than later." Price's jaw tightened with the irritation of being told anything by a nurse. Then he glanced at Ava's face, at the steadiness there, and something softened into practicality. "Fine," he said. "I'll go." Ava stepped back without satisfaction, without a comment. She watched him walk away and then return to the flow of the floor. Near the supply closet, a new grad nurse struggled with a monitor that would not stop alarming. She clicked through menus with frantic fingers. Ava stepped in, adjusted one setting, reseated the cuff line, and the alarm quieted. The new grad blinked. "How did you do that?" Ava's hands trembled faintly as she closed the panel. It was set to the wrong interval. The new grad stared at her hands. Not cruelly, just curious. Ava let her see it and did not explain. She walked away before curiosity could turn into a question that would make both of them uncomfortable. At mid-morning, Dr. Grant Mercer arrived with the energy of someone who believed calm existed for his benefit. He walked in mid-conversation with Dr. Vanessa Lane, laughing about a case from last week. His laugh carried. People straightened without realizing they were doing it. Mercer stopped at the board and scanned the assignments. His finger tapped once near Ava's name. "Caldwell," he called. Ava turned. Mercer's eyes dropped to her hands as if it was reflex, enjoying the quiet while it lasts. "Yes," Dr. Ava said. Mercer's mouth twisted into a smirk. "Try not to manifest an emergency with that nervous energy of yours." A couple of residents chuckled, the kind of laugh that did not commit them to cruelty, but still fed it. Ava nodded once and returned to charting. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. The tremor was less noticeable when she typed. The keys gave her a rhythm. Rhythm was easier than stillness. Brenda passed behind Mercer and did not stop. She did not reward him with attention. She carried her clipboard like a shield and a weapon, and her eyes were already on the next problem. Ava followed her own routine. She checked the airway cart. She restocked syringes. She replaced a roll of tape before anyone else had to notice it was missing. She aligned spare gurneys so that wheels did not lock in a narrow corridor. It was all small. It was all quiet. It made the floor breathe easier. No one said thank you because no one noticed. That was how it always was. Around 10:30, there was a lull. Not true peace, but the closest a trauma center came. Patients slept. Families sat with their phones and their fear. Staff leaned into countertops for a moment too long, borrowing a few seconds of stillness before the next wave. Ava poured water into a paper cup and held it with both hands. The tremor returned sharp and immediate now that her body did not have a task to hide inside. The water rippled like a tiny storm. She set the cup down carefully and folded her hands together until the shaking eased. She breathed slow, counting in her head, keeping the rhythm private. Brenda noticed anyway. She did not stare. She did not pity. She walked to Ava's station and spoke low. "You sleeping?" Brenda asked. Ava kept her eyes on the screen. "Yes." "You eating?" "Yes." Brenda's gaze flicked to Ava's clasped fingers, then back to her face. "You good to be here?" Ava met her eyes. "Yes." Brenda held that gaze for a beat longer than most people did with Ava. Then she nodded once and moved on. Ava returned to her charting and let her hands separate. The tremor was still there, quieter now. She made it invisible by staying busy. At 11:47, the dispatch radio changed tone. The static cleared. The voice came through clipped and precise, like someone reading from a script they hated. "Tidewater be advised. Multi-vehicle collision. Interstate 64 eastbound, near the downtown tunnel. Unknown casualties. Possible rollover. Possible fire." The words landed in the air and tightened it. Ava's eyes lifted from the screen. Brenda's head snapped up. Lauren's coffee cup paused halfway to her mouth. The dispatcher continued, breath-controlled voice, steady in the way you learned to be steady when you were saying terrible things. "Stand by for confirmation. Units on scene reporting multiple impacts. Secondary collisions. Potential entrapment." The floor did not move yet. It listened. That was the moment before a wave hit shore, when the ocean pulled back and everyone who had learned to read the water knew it was about to come hard. Then the dispatcher spoke the phrase that turned listening into motion. "Confirmed mass casualty incident." "Repeat." "Confirmed mass casualty incident." Chairs scraped back. Gloves snapped. Conversations cut off mid-sentence like someone had pulled the power. Brenda's voice cut clean through it. "All hands. Surge protocol. Clear the bays." People moved with rehearsed urgency. Not calm exactly, but practiced. Ava stood and put her hands flat on the counter for half a second. The tremor faded as her mind narrowed. Focus was a switch she could flip. Calm did not always allow it. Crisis did. Mercer stepped forward like he had been waiting for this call. "All right," he said, voice rising, filling space. "Trauma teams, let's go. Triage fast. Red tags first. We prioritize life threats. No freelancing." His energy sharpened the floor. It did not soothe. It commanded. A resident jogged toward the supply room. A tech ran for extra monitors. Someone wheeled a crash cart into position. The automatic doors at the end of the main corridor opened and closed as staff moved through them, sensors clicking. Ava did not rush. She moved deliberately, like every step was placed. She checked oxygen lines. She verified suction. She moved gurneys to where they would be needed, not where they usually sat. She aligned them so wheels would not tangle when too many bodies entered too quickly. Lauren glanced at her. "We need blood coolers." Ava nodded. "I'll get one." She moved down the hall and into the supply area. Her eyes tracked exits without thinking. Stairwell, service corridor, elevator. She grabbed the cooler, checked the seal, checked the latch, then carried it back with both hands steady. As she set it down, the dispatch radio crackled again, words stacking fast. Multiple patients, injuries ranging from minor to catastrophic. Potential fire injuries, unknown number of critical. The voice paused, then continued. In the overlap of radio chatter, one word slipped through quiet but clear. Convoy. Then a correction from another voice, quick, almost defensive. Correction, multiple vehicles involved. The word convoy was gone as fast as it arrived. Most people never noticed it. Ava's head lifted a fraction. Her eyes narrowed, not in fear, in recognition of a pattern. Convoy was not a word dispatch used casually. It was not a word civilians used to describe accidents. It was a word that belonged to a certain kind of movement, a certain kind of planning. She filed it away without comment. Brenda paced the floor, assigning roles, voice sharp. Lauren, triage nurse. Jamie, runner. Respiratory on standby. Lab, I want you ready for rapid cross-match. Mercer stood at the center like a conductor. I want clean handoffs. I want no surprises. We move. Ava positioned herself near the middle of the trauma floor, not at the head of a bay, not hidden behind a station. Somewhere she could go left or right without being trapped. Somewhere she could see the corridor. Somewhere she could hear the radio. Mercer noticed her stance and misread it. "Caldwell," he snapped. Ava turned. "Stay out of the way," Mercer said. "This is not the time for you to get rattled." Ava met his eyes. Her face gave him nothing to grab. "I won't." Mercer's mouth tightened as if he wanted to argue. Then he turned back to the board and started barking orders at residents who were already moving. The floor shifted into surge mode. Extra stretchers were pulled into the hallway. Trauma bags were opened. Scissors placed on counters. IV kits lined up like ammunition. Ava checked the airway card again. Laryngoscope blades, endotracheal tubes, bag valve mask. She made sure everything was where hands would reach without thought. The dispatch radio updated again. Patients trapped. Fire confirmed at scene. Units requesting additional transport. Brenda looked down the corridor and then back at the bays. Her eyes were quick. Her mind was faster. "We're going to get slammed," she said. Not to anyone in particular, but the words carried anyway. No one replied. They did not need to. The air already said it. Ava moved to the sink and washed her hands methodically. Soap, scrub, rinse, dry. She did not rush it. She had learned that when you rushed, you missed something. Missing something cost lives. As she dried her hands, the tremor was gone. Not hidden. Gone. Lauren rushed past her with a stack of triage tags. "Why are you so calm?" Lauren blurted the question, slipping out without permission. Ava looked at her. "Because we're busy." Lauren blinked as if she did not know what to do with that. Then she turned and kept moving. In the trauma bay, Dr. Simone Hart walked in and snapped on gloves. She looked around and assessed the room like a chessboard. Her eyes landed on Mercer. "Who's running command?" Hart asked. Mercer lifted his chin. "I am." Hart did not argue. She just nodded and turned to a resident. You're on airway. Don't freeze. The resident swallowed and nodded too hard. Ava watched that exchange and noted it. Mercer liked authority declared. Hart liked authority assumed. Both could save lives. Both could get people killed if their pride got in the way. The dispatch radio was nearly constant now, voices overlapping, as if the city itself was trying to speak too fast. First unit departing scene with 2 critical. Additional ambulances en route. Be advised, multiple red tags. A nurse at the station called out numbers, then corrected them upward. 8 incoming, no 12. A moment later, 15. Then the number that made people's faces tighten. 17. 17 patients was not a training number. It was not a drill scenario where everyone knew the ending. It was volume. It was bodies. It was the point where a system stopped being a system and became a test of human coordination. Mercer's smile flashed for half a second, tight excited. Big enough to matter. Big enough to prove something. All right, he said, voice louder. We triage fast. We prioritize obvious life threats. We move them through E8s. No one I didn't get stuck. Ava heard what he did not say. No one assigned to watch for silent failures. No one assigned to scan the room for what fell between commands. She took 1 step left to widen her view, another half step back so she could see the nurse station and the corridor simultaneously. She loosened her shoulders. She planted her feet. Brenda moved beside her, eyes on the corridor. You okay? Brenda asked quick. Ava nodded, yes. Brenda's gaze flicked to Ava's hands. Steady. Brenda did not comment. She just nodded and moved away, voice already rising to direct the next task. Mercer walked past Ava again and did not stop. He did not need to. He believed the floor belonged to him in moments like this. The overhead lights hummed. The emergency power system sat silent and ready. Monitors blinked numbers that still made sense for now. Ava listened for the sounds that mattered. Footsteps. Door sensors. Radio cadence. The way voices changed when fear entered them. A tech crossed himself near the supply closet, quick and private, as if the gesture could protect him from blood. Lauren snapped on another pair of gloves. Her face was pale under the fluorescent light. Ava watched her and said nothing. Sometimes, silence was the only thing that did not make panic worse. The first siren rose in the distance, faint at first, then louder, threading through the walls like a warning signal. It grew and multiplied, a chorus of emergency engines converging. In the corridor, someone pushed open the double doors to clear the path. The automatic doors at the far end of the hall stood still, sensors waiting. Ava flexed her fingers once, slow. No tremor. Her breathing slowed. Her awareness sharpened until the world felt narrow and clean. Brenda's voice cut across the floor. Positions. Now. People moved into place. Masks were pulled down under chins, ready to snap up. Trauma shears glinted under the lights. The gurneys were aligned. The bays were open. Ava took her spot where she could see the corridor, the bays and Mercer's back. The sirens swelled to a roar. The doors at the end of the hallway slid open. The doors slid open and the corridor filled so fast the building seemed to inhale. The first gurney hit the threshold, hard wheels rattling against tile. A man with a blood-soaked shirt clutched his own throat, eyes wide and glassy oxygen mask fogging with every panicked breath. Behind him came another, then another paramedics, shouting over each other, voices fraying as they tried to keep the flood organized. Red tag, unstable pelvis pressure, dropping. Yellow tag, burns to both arms, airway stable. Green tag, walking wounded, lacerations, only move them to overflow. The floor responded like a machine that had rehearsed disaster in controlled rooms and now had to do it for real. Nurses snapped gloves on. Techs grabbed monitors. Residents took positions, faces tight with adrenaline and fear they refused to name. Brenda Holt moved down the line. Eyes sharp, mouth set, voice cutting clean through the chaos. Reds to bay 1, 2, 3, yellows to 4 through 6, greens down the hall. Keep the corridor clear. Lauren started triage with a stack of tags in her hand, snapping decisions like she was afraid hesitation would cost someone their heartbeat. Ava stood near the center, not frozen, not frantic. Her eyes tracked the wave the way you tracked surf when you knew the undertow could kill you. She watched how bodies moved. She listened for what people did not say. She noted the way Mercer kept stepping into the loudest space, pulling gravity toward himself as if the room could not function unless he was at its center. "Move!" Mercer barked, sliding between two gurneys. "I want vitals on every red in 60 seconds. No one waits on imaging if they cannot breathe." A resident hurried to obey. A nurse bumped a cart. Gauze spilled. Someone swore. Ava slid one step to the left and caught the rolling gauze before it hit the floor. She set it back on the cart, closed the drawer, kept moving without looking up. Her hands were steady. Then, the paramedics brought in the gurney that changed the temperature of the room. Tanya Ruiz was at the head, sweat streaking down her jawline, her expression controlled but taut. Her partner pushed from the side shoulders, hunched from the weight and urgency. Coming through, Ruiz shouted, "Critical, full trauma activation." The gurney surged forward. The sheet was dark with blood. The patient's chest rose unevenly, one side lagging like the ribs were refusing to move. Ruiz spoke fast, each phrase clipped to fit between breaths. "Male, 38. Found in a pileup near the tunnel. Multiple shrapnel wounds, torso and thigh. Suspected blast fragments. BP 80/50, on scene tachy at 140. Breath sounds diminished on the right. We decompressed once, got a little air, still struggling. He's losing blood and he's been fighting to stay awake." Brenda's eyes narrowed at one word she did not repeat. Shrapnel did not belong to traffic accidents. Neither did blast fragments. She did not say it out loud. Her face did not change. She just signaled Bay 3. "3, Brenda said. "Now!" Mercer stepped in front of the gurney like a man meeting a challenge. "Who is he?" Mercer demanded. Ruiz did not hesitate. "Commander Jace Rourke, Navy." The title landed heavier than the name. A few heads turned. A resident's posture snapped straighter. A nurse glanced toward the hallway as if expecting uniforms to follow. Mercer did not care about titles unless they belonged to him. He cared about the body on the bed and the attention it drew. "Bay 3, he ordered. "Chest and airway. Move." They rolled Rourke into the bay in a rush of bodies. Overhead lights flooded him in harsh white, exposing blood-torn skin and the gray cast creeping across his face. His hair was damp with sweat. His jaw clenched every time the gurney hit a seam in the tile. A tech cut away the remaining fabric. The smell of iron rose sharp and wet. "Monitor," Brenda called. "2 large bore." Mercer snapped. "Now!" A resident reached for an IV kit. Another moved for ultrasound. Someone called for blood. Ava stayed at the edge of the bay for half a second, eyes taking in details in one sweep. Shrapnel peppered the upper torso and one thigh, small punctures that looked clean until you saw how much blood they could hide. One side of the chest rose shallow, the neck muscles strained with each breath. She watched Mercer's gaze lock onto the obvious. Chest, airway, visible bleeding. Rourke's eyes fluttered open. At first, they were unfocused, sliding across faces in fragments. Scrubs, white coats, a mask, the bright circle of a surgical light. He blinked hard, as if he could force the blur into clarity by will alone. His gaze drifted toward Mercer and slid past him like Mercer was a signpost, not a person. It landed on Ava. For a moment, Ava felt the air tighten, not because the room noticed, but because she did. Rourke's eyes steadied on her face. Something sharpened behind them, a shift so subtle it would have been dismissed as reflex if you were not watching closely. Pain pulled his mouth into a grimace. His breathing hitched. He should not have had the strength for anything beyond survival. His right hand twitched. Fingers curled, then straightened with deliberate effort. He raised his hand from the sheet, elbow locking with muscle memory that did not need permission. A salute. Not perfect, not crisp, weakened by blood loss, but unmistakable. The room stuttered. A resident froze with a tourniquet in hand. A nurse paused mid-motion, eyes flicking between Rourke and Ava, like she was trying to translate a language she had never learned. Mercer's head snapped up, irritation flaring. "Focus," he snapped. "He's hypoxic. He's delirious." Rourke's eyes did not leave Ava. Ava did not salute back. She did not do anything that would feed the room's curiosity. She gave the smallest nod, just enough to acknowledge him without creating spectacle. In that instant, her hands did not tremble at all. Mercer did not notice her hands. He noticed the break in his choreography. "What is this?" Mercer muttered, then louder. "We are not doing that. Ultrasound now. Breath sounds confirm." A resident pressed the probe to Rourke's chest. Another listened with a stethoscope, eyes darting to the monitor. "Right side diminished," the resident said. "Needle again," Mercer ordered. "Prep for chest tube if needed." Rourke's breathing rasped. His skin had the washed-out color of someone whose body was losing the argument. The monitor numbers blinked. Heart rate 142. Pressure 84/50. Oxygen sat low and stubborn. Ava watched the numbers, but she watched the body more. She saw the subtle swelling in the thigh under the sheet. Not dramatic. Not spurting. A slow expansion that did not belong to normal bruising. She watched Mercer's hands move, decisive, commanding. He was good. He was skilled. He was also narrowed to the problem he wanted to solve, and in a room like this, focus could become a blindfold. The ultrasound showed a hint of free fluid, then the image lagged, freezing for half a beat. The screen blinked and caught up. The bay lights flickered so fast it could have been imagined, but Ava felt the change in the room's rhythm. The ventilator alarm chirped once, then fell silent. A nurse frowned at the machine. It just reset. Brenda's voice came tight. "Check back up. Check outlets." Someone ran to the wall. Another tech cursed under his breath as a monitor screen dimmed and brightened again. Mercer raised his voice, trying to force the room back into order through sheer volume. "Chest tube tray. Now. We do not wait on equipment. We move." Ava felt her attention drop away from the noise and lock onto Rourke's breathing. It was changing. Not the frantic pattern of panic. Something deeper. A faint wetness, a pull that signaled the body was compensating for something it could not afford. His lips were pale. His jaw clenched. His eyes remained on Ava as if he was holding onto her presence the way a drowning man held onto the edge of a boat. Mercer called for pressure on a wound near the ribcage. A nurse complied. Ava took one step closer. The floor beneath her felt suddenly too solid, too civilian, but her mind was moving through a different place entirely. The tremor that had haunted her in calm spaces did not exist here. Here, there was only task. The lights flickered again, longer this time. A low murmur ran through the bay. A resident looked up, eyes wide. "Are we losing power?" Brenda's answer was immediate. "Backup will hold. Keep working." The monitors blinked. One went dark. Another came back with a delayed hum. Rourke's heart rate spiked. The alarm sharpened. Someone called out numbers that did not match the monitor because the monitor was lagging half a beat behind the body. Ava felt it, the mismatch between machine and flesh. Mercer leaned over Rourke, focused on the chest, his hands already moving toward the next intervention. Ava dropped. One smooth motion brought her to her knee beside the gurney. Her hand slid under the sheet toward the thigh, not searching randomly, not guessing. Her fingers found warmth and swelling, then the slickness of blood. Deep, pressurized, wrong. Her stomach tightened, not in fear, in recognition. This was the kind of bleeding that killed quietly while everyone stared at the dramatic wound. She shifted her hand higher, found the point where pressure mattered. The femoral triangle, a location the body remembered even when the brain refused to speak. She pressed down hard. Rourke's body jerked with pain. A rough sound tore from his throat. A nurse turned. "What are you doing?" "I've got it," Ava said, voice low and steady. "Arterial bleed. Right here." The words were simple, not a speech. They sliced through the bay, better than shouting. A resident leaned down, eyes widening as he saw blood seep under Ava's glove. "How did we miss that?" Mercer looked down sharply, irritation flaring the moment he saw Ava on the floor, breaking his flow. Caldwell Mercer snapped. "Get up. You are in the way." Ava did not look at him. She did not need to. Her entire focus was on the pressure under her palm and how Rourke's body responded to it. "Pressure here," she repeated, more precise. "He's bleeding out through his leg. Chest is not your only problem." Mercer's face flushed. "We are handling this." Ava adjusted by millimeters, shifting her shoulder into the gurney for leverage, anchoring herself so her hand would not slip even if the room shook. Rourke's eyes fluttered. He gasped again, then his breathing steadied by a fraction. The monitor lagged, then caught up. The heart rate began to fall, not to normal, but down from the edge. Someone in the bay, a nurse Ava had barely spoken to, stared at Ava's hands like she was seeing them for the first time. Brenda stepped closer, eyes on the thigh swelling. She did not ask Ava to move. She did not defend her with words either. She simply assessed and acted. "Get me junctional pressure," Brenda called. "If we have a device, bring it. If not, hemostatic gauze." Now. A tech ran. Mercer's jaw tightened. "We need imaging." Brenda did not argue with him directly. "We need him alive long enough for imaging." Mercer's eyes flashed anger mixing with something else he did not want to show. A resident crouched beside Ava. "How long can you hold that?" Ava's breathing stayed even. "As long as I need to." Rourke turned his head slightly, eyes locking onto Ava's face. He looked past the oxygen mask, past pain, as if he was forcing memory into the present. His voice came out raw, a rasp shaped by blood loss. "Still steady," he whispered. Ava leaned closer, just enough for him to hear her over the chaos. "Stay with me, Commander," she said. His eyes flicked not to the monitor, not to Mercer, but to Ava's hands. "You found it," he breathed. "Of course you did." A nurse tried to step in to take over the pressure. Ava lifted her free hand slightly, palm out, not aggressive, just firm. "Not yet," she said. "You move, you lose the point." The nurse froze, then nodded. Mercer's voice sharpened. "This is not protocol." Ava finally looked up at him. Her expression was calm, unreadable. Her eyes did not challenge him with drama. They challenged him with competence. "Then update the protocol," she said. Mercer stared at her as if he had misheard. The lights flickered again, and half the monitors went dark for a breath-long second. Emergency power surged back, humming, louder, angry. The bay filled with the sound of systems struggling to keep up. Ava did not flinch. Rourke's breathing steadied another notch. His eyes stayed open now, focused, fighting. Mercer barked for clamps again, for vascular access for blood. "Massive transfusion," Brenda called. "Get it moving." Blood arrived. Lines were primed. The room moved. Ava kept pressure. Her shoulder burned. Her wrist ached. Her palm felt numb, and then it didn't. She shifted micro-angles, reading resistance under her hand like it was terrain. Rourke's mouth twitched under the oxygen mask, a grim hint of a smile. He looked at Ava like he was seeing a person he had not expected to find in this place. His voice came again clearer, as if the act of speaking anchored him. "Lieutenant," he said. The word did not belong in that bay. It landed and stayed. A resident's head jerked up. Lauren froze in the doorway with a bag of saline. Brenda's gaze flicked to Ava's face, then away, like she refused to make the moment larger than the patient. Mercer's eyes narrowed. "What did you call her?" Rourke swallowed, throat working painfully. "Lieutenant Ava Caldwell," he whispered. "Combat medic." Silence flashed through the room, not total, but sharp enough that everyone felt it. Ava did not react outwardly. She did not correct him. She did not confirm. Her hands kept working. Her focus stayed on the bleed. Mercer's voice came out too loud, defensive. "This is a hospital!" Rourke's eyes stayed on Ava. "She knows what failure looks like," he rasped. "She doesn't allow it." A nurse stared at Ava's hands again. Those hands that shook when she signed charts. Those hands now locked into perfect pressure while the building flickered. Mercer's face tightened. "Commander, you need to conserve energy." Rourke did not look at Mercer. "You should listen," he said, each word costing him. "She saved you from yourself." Mercer bristled, but the room had shifted. The resident who had been following Mercer's orders automatically now hesitated, eyes flicking to Ava, before acting. The chain of command bent just slightly toward the person holding the bleed. A tech returned with hemostatic gauze, hands shaking. Ava guided him with calm clarity. "Pack above my hand," she said. "Do not pull pressure away. Pack around it." He nodded too fast. Okay. Ava watched his fingers. "Slow down." He slowed. Brenda moved in and helped her hands efficient, her voice steady. "On my count." Ava counted softly. 1, 2, 3. They packed and maintained pressure. They secured it. They added a pressure device once it arrived, anchoring it in place. Ava eased her palm away slowly, testing whether the bleed would surge back. It held. Rourke's eyes stayed on her face the entire time. His pulse still raced, but it was no longer slipping into nothing. The Bay exhaled without realizing it. Ava stood rising from the floor in one controlled motion. Blood coated her glove. She peeled it off and dropped it into a bin, then snapped on a fresh pair without ceremony. Her hands were still steady. Mercer stared at her, something in his expression struggling to find purchase. Anger did not fit what he had seen. Mockery did not fit either. He reached for authority because it was what he knew. "You do not step into my bay and take over," he said, voice low and sharp. Ava met his eyes. "I did not take over," she replied. "I filled a gap." Mercer's nostrils flared. "You are a nurse." Ava did not blink. "I am whatever keeps him alive." Mercer's mouth opened as if to answer, then a new alarm cut across the bay, pulling attention away before he could regain control. Rourke's gurney rolled forward again, guided toward imaging and surgery. The team moved as one now with a different awareness. They watched Ava's hands. They watched her eyes. They watched the way she moved through bodies without bumping, without asking permission, as if she already knew where everyone would be before they got there. As the gurney cleared the bay, Rourke turned his head as far as pain allowed. His gaze found Ava one last time. His hand twitched, but he did not have the strength to raise it again. He gave a small nod instead. Ava returned it minimal private. Brenda stepped beside Ava at the threshold, voice low enough to be only for her. "You want to tell me about Lieutenant?" Brenda asked. Ava's jaw tightened. Her eyes flicked to the corridor where more gurneys were coming in, more blood, more voices. "Not now," Ava said. Brenda studied her for a beat, then nodded. "Not now." The corridor was still a river of bodies. In Bay 4, a burn patient cried for water. In Bay 5, a man with a shattered wrist begged to call his wife. In Bay 1, someone's oxygen dropped and a resident shouted for airway. The floor did not pause to process what had just happened. It swallowed it and kept moving because that was what trauma floors did. Ava washed her hands quickly, methodically. The water ran red for a moment and then clear. She dried them, flexed her fingers once. Still steady. Lauren stared at her from across the station, face pale. "He called you Lieutenant," Lauren said, voice thin. Ava did not look up. "Focus on your triage tags." Lauren swallowed and nodded, embarrassed by her own curiosity. Mercer moved through the corridor again, barking orders, his confidence bruised but not broken. He stopped once, eyes on Ava, as if he wanted to reclaim the room with a single sentence. Before he could speak, another gurney slammed into the bay entrance, and the wave demanded attention. Ava stepped toward the next patient without hesitation. The trauma floor surged, and somewhere behind the noise, a monitor alarm rose higher than the rest. The monitor alarm climbed into a pitch that made every spine tighten. A thin, relentless scream that meant the numbers were dropping faster than hands could correct. Ava's head turned before anyone called her name. The sound came from Bay 5 down the corridor, where a pregnant woman was being pushed in hard. The gurney wheels clattering like they were trying to outrun the truth. Her face was waxy skin stretched tight over cheekbones, eyes half closed. One hand was pressed over her abdomen with a protective force that looked instinctive, not learned. 30 weeks, the paramedic shouted. Possible placental abruption. BP 70/40, heart rate 160. She's fading. The baby monitor's jagged rhythm cut through the air, frantic and uneven. Brenda moved in fast. "OB is coming. Neonatal on standby. Get me blood." A resident stepped forward, already sweating. "We need volume. Now." A cooler lid snapped open. Someone lifted a blood bag like it was salvation. In the rush, the label faced outward for one brief second before the line was primed. Ava saw it. AB negative. Her eyes dropped to the patient's chart on the gurney clip, then back to the blood bag, then to the chart again. Her mind did the math without thinking, a reflex that lived deeper than the hospital training videos. The patient's wristband read O positive. A nurse raised the spike toward the port. "Hang it." Mercer pushed into the bay like a storm. "Do it. We do not wait." Ava stepped forward and placed herself between the line and the patient, her body blocking the connection. She did not shove anyone. She did not flail. She simply stopped the motion cold. The nurse's eyes widened. "Ava, move." Mercer's head snapped toward her, outrage flaring. "Caldwell, get out of the way." Ava kept her voice steady. "That blood is wrong." Mercer's laugh was sharp, disbelieving. "We are not debating blood types while she's crashing." Ava lifted her hand and tapped the label firm and precise. "AB negative. She is O positive. Verify it." The resident's face tightened. "AB negative is universal plasma. We are not giving plasma," Ava said. Her eyes stayed on the bag. "That is packed, red blood cells." The nurse holding the line hesitated, torn between hierarchy and instinct. The patient moaned a weak sound that made people rush harder. The baby's heart rate dipped again, the monitor's jagged rhythm turning uglier. Mercer stepped closer, anger boiling up. "Any blood is better than none." Ava did not raise her voice. She did not match his volume. She made the words heavy instead. "Wrong blood will kill her," she said. "And the baby." The nurse tried to angle the line around Ava's shoulder. Ava widened her stance and blocked it completely. Her gaze locked her posture, unyielding. Brenda arrived at the bay entrance and assessed the scene in half a second. "Scan it," she snapped. A tech fumbled for the scanner, hands shaking, eyes darting. The machine lagged. The seconds felt thick and physical. Mercer leaned toward Brenda. "This is insane." Brenda's eyes stayed on the label. "Scan it." The scanner chirped. Mismatch. The sound was small. The silence it created was not. The nurse holding the blood bag froze, horror flashing across her face as reality punched through adrenaline. Someone swore under their breath. The resident's mouth opened and closed once, like the words were stuck behind shame. Mercer stared at the screen as if it had betrayed him personally. Brenda's voice cut in. "Call for O positive now. Flush the line." The wrong bag was pulled back like it was contaminated. The correct unit was requested. The cooler lid slammed shut and reopened as someone dug with desperate hands. Ava stepped aside without ceremony. The correct blood arrived with agonizing slowness, but it arrived. The transfusion started again, this time right. Gradually, numbers climbed. The patient's breathing steadied enough to be real. The baby's heart rate smoothed the jagged rhythm, settling into something that sounded like hope, not panic. No one thanked Ava. No one apologized. The room did not have space for that. It only had space for the next crisis. Ava stayed one extra beat to watch the woman's color return by degrees, then turned away. Her hands trembled faintly as the adrenaline drained. She clasped them together at her waist until the shaking softened into something she could hide. Mercer moved out of the bay, with his jaw-tight eyes bright with anger that had nowhere to land. He snapped at a resident, in passing voice, too loud. "Do not let a nurse stall treatment again." A nurse near the station murmured to another, not mocking this time. Confused, uneasy, that would have killed her. The other nurse glanced at Ava, then looked away fast, like looking too long meant admitting something. The floor surged on. At the far end of the trauma corridor, another alarm rose deeper than the rest. A patient's oxygen saturation dropped in a way that did not match the monitor's cheerful confidence a moment earlier. A young intern stood at the bedside with a bag valve mask in his hands, staring at the patient's face like he had never seen a face stop cooperating before. "Airway," someone called. Then louder, "Airway." The intern Tyler Grant reached for the mask with hands that suddenly did not know how to be hands. He placed it wrong, then adjusted it too late, too loose. The patient's chest barely rose. The oxygen alarm screamed. The intern's eyes widened. Panic stiffened his shoulders. He looked toward Mercer as if waiting for permission to act. The patient coded. The alarm snapped into a different sound, sharper and merciless. The room tightened around the bed. Voices overlapped, instructions colliding. "Start compressions. Get the crash cart. Epi ready." The intern froze, completely staring at the mask like it had betrayed him. His mouth opened and no words came out. Ava was already moving. She did not announce herself. She did not ask for space. She stepped in close, reached past the intern's rigid arms, and took the mask from his hands with a firm calm that felt unreal against the panic. "Watch," she said low. She repositioned the head with a jaw thrust, careful, deliberate. She sealed the mask with both hands and began ventilation with measured breaths, timing each squeeze to the rise of the chest. The patient's chest rose. Ava adjusted her grip by millimeters, listening with her fingers for resistance, for compliance, for life, pushing back. The intern stumbled back a step, eyes glassy with shame and relief. A resident started compressions. A nurse pushed epinephrine. The room moved. Ava kept bagging steady, consistent, unbroken. Her hands did not tremble. The heart monitor twitched. The rhythm stuttered. Then it caught. Pulse, someone shouted. Another voice confirmed it, disbelieving. We have a pulse. The alarm softened, still urgent, but less desperate. Ava did not celebrate. She kept breathing for the patient, eyes tracking the chest, matching her rhythm to what the body needed, not what the room wanted. Mercer appeared at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, watching. For the first time that morning, his face held no joke, no smirk. His gaze was locked on Ava's hands, on the quiet competence he had spent weeks dismissing. Brenda stepped in and spoke to the intern without cruelty. Step out. Get water. Then come back and watch. You learn or you repeat. The intern nodded too fast and backed away. Ava held the airway until respiratory arrived and secured it properly. Only then did she step back, remove her gloves, and dispose of them. Her breathing remained steady. Her eyes were already scanning for the next gap. The floor did not let anyone rest. A low hum shifted in the walls, a change that wasn't quite sound and wasn't quite vibration. Lights dimmed for a breath, like the building itself was blinking. Then the monitors flickered. One screen went black. Another blinked, numbers disappearing, then returning wrong. A ventilator stuttered and chirped. The overhead lights sagged bright to dull bright again. A murmur ran through the staff, the kind that came from realizing the machines might not carry them today. Power, a nurse said. We're losing power. Brenda's voice cut in. Manual checks. Now. Emergency power kicked in with a delayed surge. The backup generators hummed, but unevenly. Some outlets held, some didn't. Alarms died in one bay and screamed louder in another, compensating in the worst possible way. 2 patients began to crash at the same time. One was a trauma victim with an airway that wouldn't hold. The other was spiraling into respiratory failure as the ventilator stuttered and the monitor lagged half a second behind the body. Ava moved between the beds with purpose, her stance widening so she could reach both without tangling lines. She sealed one mask and began manual ventilation, steady, and controlled her eyes, tracking skin tone and chest rise. With her free hand, she reached for the second bag valve mask, adjusting her weight, distributing forced timing breaths so neither patient was deprived. It was not graceful, it was efficient. A nurse beside her stared. How are you doing that? Ava did not look up. Count with me. The nurse blinked, then nodded, falling into the rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Ava synced her breath to the count. Machines flickered. Human hands took over. Mercer's voice rose above the noise, trying to command the building back into obedience. Get respiratory in here. Get anesthesia. Move. Ava kept breathing for 2 people, as if the chaos around her was weather, and she had learned how to work in storms. Then the administrators arrived. They did not run. They did not ask who was dying. They stepped onto the trauma floor with stiff posture and polished shoes, flanked by security officers whose eyes were on staff, not patients. Marianne Kessler led them, hair pulled back tight, an ID badge that gave her access to everything and responsibility for nothing immediate. She scanned the floor like she was counting liabilities. Her gaze landed on Ava. Nurse Caldwell Kessler said, voice loud enough to cut through alarms. Step away from the patients. Ava did not stop ventilating. She did not look up right away. I can't, she said evenly. They'll crash. Kessler's jaw tightened. You are suspended pending investigation. The words landed absurdly like a bad joke delivered at the wrong funeral. Mercer turned sharply. This is not the time. Kessler's eyes flicked to him cold. It is exactly the time. We have reports of reckless behavior, interfering with treatment, acting outside protocol. A paramedic Ruiz stepped forward, disbelief on her face. Reckless. She stopped a hidden arterial bleed you all missed. Another voice joined a nurse Ava barely knew. She blocked a fatal transfusion mismatch. A tech swallowed hard. She took over airway when the intern froze. Kessler did not soften. Evidence did not soften her. It hardened her as if proof was simply a complication to manage. That will be determined by review, Kessler said. Brenda stepped up beside Kessler, eyes sharp. Then review the footage. Kessler's gaze narrowed. Footage is not clinical judgment. Brenda did not blink. Footage is what happened. Mercer's mouth opened as if he wanted to speak, but he stopped. He watched Ava ventilate, watched the patient stabilize by inches under her rhythm. His certainty was gone. In its place was something heavier, something he didn't know how to wear. A security officer shifted, uncertain. He glanced at Kessler, then at the beds, then back. His hands hovered near his belt, as if he expected violence from the person holding a bag valve mask. Ava continued ventilating until additional support arrived and a ventilator held steady enough to take over. Only then did she step back, lowering the mask carefully. She removed her gloves slowly. The tremor returned in a faint ripple as adrenaline released its grip. She clasped her hands at her waist until it quieted. Kessler stepped closer. "You need to leave the floor." Ava met her eyes for the first time. Her expression was calm, not defiant, not pleading, simply present. "When they're stable," Ava said. Kessler's face tightened. "They are stable enough." Brenda's voice came low, controlled. "No, they are barely." Kessler ignored Brenda. Security. The security officers shifted again, uneasy. No one moved to touch Ava. The floor buzzed with a new tension, not panic, not adrenaline, but betrayal. The feeling that something was wrong with priorities, wrong with power. A monitor on the wall still worked on emergency power. Brenda pointed at it. "Pull the camera feed from Bay 3 and Bay 5. Now." A tech hurried to the screen, fingers moving fast. The feed popped up in grainy clarity. Ava on the floor beside Commander Rourke's gurney, hand buried under the sheet, stopping the bleed. Ava blocking the blood bag, scanning the mismatched chirp. Ava sealing the airway mask while the intern stood frozen. The footage looped clinical and undeniable. Around them, people watched in silence. Nurses, paramedics. Even a resident who had laughed at Ava's signature earlier stared at the screen with his mouth slightly open. Kessler watched Two-Face expressionless. When the loop ended, she did not look shaken. She looked annoyed. "Send that to risk management," she said. Brenda's eyes flashed. "Send it to whoever is trying to blame her." Kessler's gaze snapped to Brenda. "Watch your tone." Brenda leaned in a fraction. "Watch your timing." Mercer finally spoke, voice tight. "This suspension is overreach." Kessler turned to him. "Doctor, you are not administration." Mercer's jaw clenched. "I am responsible for this floor." Kessler's smile was thin. "You are responsible for outcomes. I am responsible for liability." The word liability hung in the air like a chemical spill. Ava listened without reacting. She had heard variations of that word in other contexts, other rooms, other chains of command. It always meant the same thing. Someone wanted control more than truth. A nurse beside the station whispered, barely audible. "Why are they so determined?" Another nurse answered softly. "Because she's a problem." The tech who had pulled the footage stared at the access log window on his screen, then closed it quickly when Kessler glanced his way. Brenda saw the motion. Her eyes narrowed. "What did you just pull up?" The tech swallowed. "Nothing." Brenda did not move away. "Show me." The tech hesitated, eyes darting to Kessler, then to Brenda. Brenda's expression did not change, but her stillness held pressure. The tech clicked back. A window displayed system events, clipped lines of text most people ignored. Security door overrides. Restricted corridor access. Admin credentials. Brenda's gaze locked on a line. A senior administrator's ID had been used to override a secured entrance. Brenda's voice stayed low. "Why is an admin badge opening restricted doors during an MCI?" Kessler's head turned sharply. "That is not your concern." Brenda's eyes stayed on the screen. "It is when it involves security." Kessler stepped closer, posture stiff. Close that. The tech hesitated. His fingers hovered. Ava watched the exchange without moving. The tremor in her hands faded as her mind sharpened. The rhythm of the floor had shifted again. Not medical chaos. Something else. Something controlled. A security officer at the end of the corridor stood too still, eyes forward, not responding to calls. Another officer beside him mirrored the posture. Waiting posture. Ava's gaze moved down the hallway, mapping distance doors' angles. Her breathing stayed slow. Kessler's voice rose slightly. "Nurse Caldwell, you are done here." Ava looked at Brenda once. Brenda's eyes held hers for a beat, then flicked to the corridor, then back. Brenda's jaw tightened. "Ava, go to the break room, now. Sit. Do not leave the unit." Kessler snapped. "She is suspended. She should be escorted out." Brenda answered without looking at Kessler. "Not in the middle of this." Mercer shifted. "We are still receiving patients." Kessler's eyes were cold. "That is why we cannot allow freelancing." Ava turned away without drama and walked toward the staff corridor. Her steps were measured. She did not hurry. She did not slow. She moved like a person who refused to become a scene. As she passed the nurse's station, Lauren caught her sleeve lightly. "Ava," she whispered, voice trembling. "What is happening?" Ava looked at her. "Do your triage." Lauren's eyes flashed with frustration and fear. "That's not an answer." Ava's gaze stayed steady. "It's the only one that keeps people alive." Lauren released her sleeve, unsettled by the calm more than by the chaos. Ava entered the break room and sat at the small table beneath a flickering fluorescent light. The room smelled like microwaved noodles and stale coffee. A stack of old magazines sat in the corner like a joke. Her suspension paperwork lay on the counter, unsigned, already printed, already waiting. Her hands trembled as she reached for the paper cup of water she had left earlier. The tremor was stronger now that she was still. She set the cup down carefully and folded her hands together until the shaking eased. From the hallway outside, voices carried. Kessler's sharp tone, Brenda's low resistance, Mercer's clipped frustration. Ava listened for footsteps that did not match the rhythm of the trauma floor. She heard them, not running, not rushing. Heavy steps, spaced evenly controlled, moving with purpose rather than panic. She stood and moved to the small window in the break room door, just enough to see the corridor without exposing herself. Down the hall, security officers stood near the junction posture, stiff eyes forward. They were not checking rooms. They were not directing flow. They were positioned like barriers. At the far end, near the elevator bank that staff rarely used, 3 men stepped out. They wore neutral clothes, no badges, no hospital colors. Their movements were synchronized without looking rehearsed, disciplined without show. They did not ask for directions. Their eyes tracked cameras, corners, and doorways as if they already knew the map. One of them turned his head, and Ava caught the outline under his jacket. Not a phone. Not a radio. A weapon. Ava's pulse did not spike into panic. It tightened into focus. She stepped back from the window and scanned the break room. One door. A back service corridor through the kitchenette area that led to linen storage and a stairwell. She moved quietly to the counter and picked up her badge lanyard. She slipped it into her pocket rather than hanging it around her neck. She checked her phone. No signal bars. The building's systems were still strained. From the hall, Kessler's voice floated past, bright and composed. "They are authorized. Authorized." Ava's jaw tightened. The break room door handle turned once, slowly, testing. Ava moved toward the kitchenette exit, silent, Ariel. Her body angled so she could pivot if the door opened. The handle turned again, then stopped. Ava waited, breathing steady, listening. Footsteps passed the break room door without pausing, moving deeper down the corridor toward patient rooms. Ava slipped out through the kitchenette exit into the service corridor, the air cooler and dimmer. The walls painted a dull institutional beige that swallowed light. The hum of the hospital faded here, replaced by the distant rumble of generators and the softer echo of boots and wheels overhead. She moved past linen carts and stacked boxes, her steps silent, her eyes tracking reflective surfaces out of habit. At the end of the corridor, The stairwell door stood closed, an emergency exit sign glowing above it. Ava reached for the bar and pushed it, gently opening it without letting the hinges squeal. She stepped into the stairwell and let the door click shut behind her, holding the sound to a whisper. The concrete walls smelled like dust and cold metal. The light was harsh and unforgiving. She paused on the landing, listening. Above her, footsteps descended in the same controlled spacing. Below her, another set of footsteps climbed. Ava's hands trembled once, then steadied as she pressed her palm against the rail and shifted her weight. She moved upward one flight at a time, quiet, measured, refusing to rush into noise. At the next landing, she heard voices from a nearby corridor, Brenda's voice low and sharp. "You open doors for armed men in my hospital." Kessler's voice clipped. "Do not accuse me of something you cannot prove." Brenda answered quieter. "I saw the log." Silence stretched heavy. Ava stayed still, listening, her breath slow. A new voice entered, male, unfamiliar, controlled. "We are here for Caldwell." Brenda's reply was immediate. "You are not going near my staff." The unfamiliar voice did not rise. "You will step aside." Ava backed away from the stairwell door and moved up another flight, choosing distance over confrontation. Her mind held the map of the hospital she had built over 3 weeks of being ignored. Service elevator, radiology corridor, old supply bridge between wings, a stairwell that opened onto a locked maintenance hallway if you knew which door stuck. She moved silent, deliberate, as the hum of the building and the cadence of pursuit braided together into one continuous sound. She moved silent, deliberate, as the hum of the building and the cadence of pursuit braided together into one continuous sound. Ava kept to the inside edge of the stairwell, one hand grazing the rail, not for balance, but for information. Concrete carried vibration. You could feel intent through it if you listened hard enough. The footsteps above were steady, spaced, like people trained to move together. The footsteps below answered in the same cadence, closing the space from both ends. She stopped on a landing and let the silence swallow her. One breath in, one breath out. The tremor tried to return in her fingers, a faint ripple at the edge of stillness, and she pressed her thumb into her palm until the sensation grounded. The stairwell door on this level had a small window. Ava eased close and angled her eyes so the glass showed her the corridor without giving the corridor her face. 2 security officers stood at the junction like statues, not scanning, not communicating, waiting. Their radios were clipped neatly untouched. Their hands were folded. Their eyes stayed forward, disciplined in a way hospital guards did not usually bother with. Farther down, the 3 men moved past an elevator bank, not looking at signs, not hesitating. One touched the wall briefly, a subtle gesture that told the others where the nearest camera sat. Their spacing never broke. Ava backed away from the window and let the stairwell door remain closed. She needed a route that did not funnel her into that corridor. She needed distance, angles, and noise that belonged to the building, not her footsteps. She went up one flight, then another, choosing levels that staff rarely used. On the 5th floor landing, she pushed through the door into a maintenance hallway where the lights were dimmer and the air smelled like old paint and metal dust. A sign on the wall warned authorized personnel only. The words meant nothing. The door had opened because Ava had watched which latch stuck and which hinge squealed when she came in early. She stepped through quietly and pulled it shut without letting it click. The maintenance corridor ran parallel to the main hospital wing. Pipes lined the ceiling like veins. Ductwork vibrated with the strained breath of the generators. There were no patients here, no families, no cameras at eye level. It was a place people forgot existed. Ava moved past a set of labeled doors. Electrical, HVAC, storage, linen overflow. She tried the storage door. Locked. She tried the next. It opened. Inside shelves held gloves, tape, gauze, spare tubing, and a row of heavy flashlights in their chargers. Ava did not hesitate. She took one flashlight and checked the beam. Bright, clean, reliable. She grabbed 2 rolls of cloth tape, a pair of trauma shears, and a pack of hemostatic gauze out of habit, even though she was not treating a wound. Her hands moved with quiet certainty, selecting tools that belonged in a hospital so no one could later claim she carried anything else. She slipped back into the hallway and closed the door. The tremor in her hands was gone again. Not because she was calm, because she was moving. A low sound drifted down the maintenance corridor, the faint scrape of a stairwell door opening somewhere below. Ava turned and walked the other way, toward a connecting bridge that linked the old wing to radiology. The bridge was narrow, lined with frosted glass that made everything outside it look like a blurred dream. At this hour, it was empty. Her shoes made the softest whisper against the floor. She kept her steps close to the wall, where the sound died faster. Halfway across the bridge, she heard the stairwell door behind her open again. Footsteps entered the maintenance hall slow and controlled. No running, no shouting. People who ran made mistakes. Ava reached the radiology door and pushed it open with 2 fingers, then slipped inside and let it close behind her. Radiology smelled different, colder, with the clean bite of disinfectant and something metallic that clung to machines. The hallway lights here were brighter, and that meant cameras. Ava welcomed cameras. Cameras were witnesses. She walked at a normal pace now, no longer a shadow. Nurses and techs passed with clipboards, eyes tired, focused on their own emergencies. Ava kept her face neutral, her posture like she belonged. A tech wheeled a portable X-ray unit past her. Ava stepped aside and nodded. "Everything okay?" the tech asked, noticing her blood-stained sleeve. Ava answered with the simplest truth that did not create panic. "Busy day." The tech nodded, already moving on. At the end of the radiology corridor was a small workroom with a desk phone. Ava stepped in, lifted the receiver, and heard dead air. The system was still unstable. She set it down gently, not slamming it, not letting frustration show. She checked the computer beside it and saw a login screen with a spinning wheel that never resolved. She heard footsteps outside. Not hospital, hurried. Not hurried at all. Ava moved to the door and looked through the narrow window. One of the men stood at the corridor corner. He did not look like staff. He did not pretend to. His gaze moved from camera to camera, then settled on the radiology door she stood behind, as if he could feel her presence through glass. He raised his hand slightly, 2 fingers curling inward. A small signal. Another man stepped into view behind him. Their spacing adjusted their bodies, angled to block the hall for anyone watching casually. The third did not appear. He would be watching the other angle. Ava backed away from the door and scanned the room. 1 exit. No second door. No ceiling tile access. A cabinet. A rolling stool. A sink. No place to hide that would keep her safe. Hiding bought seconds. She needed position. Ava stepped to the sink and turned on the water. Not full blast. Just enough to create sound. She took a paper towel, wiped the blood off her wrist, then tucked the towel into the trash. She set the flashlight on the counter near the door beam, facing outward, but off. Ready. The door handle moved slowly. Ava stood 2 steps to the side, not in the direct line of sight. Her breathing stayed even. The handle turned again. The latch clicked. The door opened a fraction. Ava waited until the gap widened enough to see a shoulder. Then she snapped the flashlight on and aimed it straight into the opening. Light flooded the crack like a weapon. The man flinched, reflexive. His hand came up, palm toward his face. That half second was all Ava needed. She kicked the door outward hard, not to crush to slam space into him. The door edge caught his shoulder and drove him back into the corridor wall. He grunted and stumbled. Ava stepped through the doorway immediately, not giving him time to recover. She kept the flashlight in his eyes, turning his vision into pain and confusion. Her other hand held the tape. He reached toward his jacket with his free hand. Ava moved in close and snapped the tape around his wrist and the door handle in 1 fast loop, then a second, then a third. Cloth tape bit and held. She pulled it tight and pressed it down so it sealed. He swore, twisting, trying to tear free. The tape stretched, but did not break. Ava did not stay to watch him fight it. She pivoted and ran 2 steps, then stopped running and became a fast walk, blending into the corridor again. Running drew attention. Attention drew crowds. Crowds got hurt. She turned into a side hall and slipped through a door labeled equipment. Inside were shelves of portable monitors and carts. A small window faced the hall. Ava moved a cart slightly to block the door from opening, fully not locked, just stubborn. She listened. The trapped man's voice rose, strained with anger. Another voice answered him low and sharp. "Quiet," the second voice said. "Quiet." Footsteps approached the equipment door. The handle turned. It pushed against the cart and stopped. It pushed again, harder. The cart scraped, but held. The door stopped moving, silence. Ava did not breathe louder, she waited. A new sound entered the hall, familiar and urgent. A hospital overhead announcement. Not a code, a security page. "Security to radiology corridor," the speaker called, voice strained. "Security to radiology corridor." Ava's eyes narrowed. That page had not existed a moment ago. Someone had decided to make noise. She moved to the small window and looked out. Brenda Holt was at the far end of the corridor, marching toward radiology, with 2 nurses behind her and 1 tech who looked terrified. Brenda held a phone in her hand, not a hospital phone, a personal phone. Her thumb moved quickly across the screen. Kessler followed 10 steps behind with 2 security officers. Her posture stayed composed, chin lifted as if she was touring a problem. One of the armed men stepped out from the corner and met them halfway. He did not raise his weapon. He did not need to. His confidence was its own threat. Brenda stopped in front of him, refusing to give ground. "You are not supposed to be here," Brenda said, voice loud enough for cameras. The man's eyes stayed calm. "We are authorized." Authorized by who, Brenda demanded. Kessler stepped forward, her voice crisp. "This is a hospital matter. Stand down, Brenda." Brenda's eyes flicked to Kessler. "You opened restricted doors." Kessler's expression did not change. "Do not create a scene." Brenda lifted her phone slightly so Kessler could see it. "I already did." Kessler's eyes flicked downward. The smallest tell, a tightening at the corner of her mouth. The armed man took 1 step closer to Brenda, still calm. "We are here for Caldwell. Give her to us." A nurse behind Brenda gasped softly, involuntary. Brenda's voice went colder. "You are not taking any staff from my floor." The man's gaze drifted past Brenda, scanning the corridor. He was looking for Ava. Ava stepped back from the window. She had seconds before someone decided to search door by door. Brenda had created a choke point, but a choke point could shift. Ava slipped out through the back of the equipment room into another corridor that led toward ICU. She chose ICU because it was controlled. Cameras, nurses, locked doors. And because Commander Rourke was there. She moved fast without running, turning corners with precision. Her badge in her pocket would not open ICU doors, but she knew the staff entrance code. She had watched it twice, not out of suspicion, out of habit. At the ICU entrance, a nurse stood behind the desk, eyes flicking between monitors. Ava approached with her hands visible, palms open. "Can you let me in?" Ava asked. The nurse frowned. "You are not assigned here." Ava kept her voice low. "There are armed men in radiology. They asked for me by name." The nurse froze, disbelief flashing. Ava leaned slightly closer. "Call your charge. Lock the doors." The nurse's face shifted from disbelief to alarm. Her hand went to the phone. Ava did not wait. She keyed the staff door code and stepped through as it opened. The nurse started speaking rapidly into the phone behind her. The ICU hall smelled like antiseptic and quiet fear. Machines beeped in steady rhythms. Curtains were drawn. Staff moved with contained urgency. Here, chaos was muffled by protocol. Ava walked straight to Rourke's room. Inside, Commander Jace Rourke lay pale against the sheets, 1 leg elevated, chest, wrapped lines running from his arms to bags and pumps. His face looked carved from strain. His eyes were closed, but his jaw moved slightly as if he was fighting sleep with will alone. Ava stepped to the bedside and checked his monitor without touching anything. Numbers held. Not good. Holding. His eyes opened. For a moment they were unfocused, then they found her and locked in. Relief flashed across his face so quickly it almost looked like pain. "You," he rasped. Ava kept her voice calm. "How are you feeling?" Rourke's mouth twitched. "Like I got hit by a truck." Ava nodded once, accepting it. "There are men in the hospital looking for you." Rourke's eyes sharpened. "For me." Ava shook her head slightly. For me, his gaze flicked over her blood-stained sleeve. His voice dropped controlled. Who let them in? Ava did not answer with speculation. An administrator override opened restricted doors. Rourke's breathing deepened, then steadied. He turned his head slightly and looked toward the door as if he could see through it. Get me a phone, he said. Ava glanced at the ICU nurse station beyond the glass. They may not hand it to you. Rourke's eyes returned to hers. Then you hand it to me. Ava stepped to the wall phone in his room and lifted the receiver. This one worked. ICU had its own lines. She held it out. Rourke's hand trembled with effort as he took it. His fingers were strong even now. He dialed from memory, not looking at the keypad long like the numbers lived in muscle. When the line connected, his voice changed, still hoarse but edged with command. This is Commander Rourke, he said. I need Naval Criminal Investigative Service and Norfolk Police at Tidewater Trauma Center. Now. Armed hostile team inside the building. Admin collusion suspected. I repeat, admin collusion suspected. He listened, eyes hardening with each breath. Then he added quieter, but with absolute clarity. Lieutenant Ava Caldwell is being targeted. If she is harmed, you will be recovering bodies, not evidence. He hung up and exhaled through his nose as if he had just completed a task that required more energy than his body should spare. Ava watched his face carefully. You should rest. Rourke looked at her. You know I will not. A knock came at the door. Ava turned. Brenda Holt stepped in, eyes sharp, face flushed with restrained fury. Behind her, an ICU security officer entered and posted himself by the door hand near his radio. His expression was different from the guards outside. This one looked like he meant it. Brenda's gaze snapped to Ava. You okay? Ava nodded, yes. Brenda looked at Rourke. Commander, you have administrators trying to remove staff and block calls. Rourke's eyes cut to Brenda. Who is the senior administrator on duty? Brenda did not hesitate. Marianne Kessler. Rourke's expression did not change, but the air felt colder. Bring her here. Brenda's eyes narrowed. She has security. Rourke's voice stayed even, so do I. The ICU officer shifted slightly as if the words flipped a switch. Minutes passed with the slow violence of waiting. ICU remained quiet, but outside the door, the hospital's sound shifted. Radios crackled, footsteps multiplied. A distant shout cut off abruptly. Then sirens arrived outside, different from ambulance sirens. Police. Ava moved to the window and looked down at the entrance. Norfolk police cruisers pulled in fast. Officers spilled out, weapons drawn, but angled downward, moving in a tight formation. Behind them, a pair of men in plain clothes moved with a different focus, showing badges as they approached the doors. Federal Energy, not local. Inside the hospital's automatic doors opened and closed as security tried to decide which authority to obey. In the ICU hall, the security officer's radio hissed. Lockdown ordered. All units hold. Brenda's phone buzzed. She answered in a low voice, listening, then looked at Ava with a tight nod. They are inside, Brenda said. Ava did not release her breath. She kept it steady. A moment later, footsteps approached the ICU door, brisk, angry, and accompanied by a soft clack of dress shoes that did not belong here. Kessler appeared in the doorway with two security officers behind her. Her posture stayed composed, but her eyes flicked too quickly, tracking the ICU guard, the closed doors, the presence of Brenda. She did not expect resistance in this space. Commander Kessler said, voice practiced. I am here to ensure your care is not disrupted. Rourke looked at her without blinking. You opened restricted doors for armed men. Kessler's smile tightened. That is a serious accusation. Rourke lifted the phone receiver and placed it back down with a deliberate click. It is a serious action. Kessler's gaze slid to Ava. Nurse Caldwell has been suspended for interfering with treatment. Rourke's eyes stayed on Kessler. She stopped an arterial bleed your trauma surgeon missed. She prevented a transfusion mismatch that would have killed a pregnant woman. She secured an airway when your intern froze. You suspended her for that. Kessler's jaw tightened. We have protocols. Rourke's voice remained flat. You have corruption. One of Kessler's security officers shifted uneasy. The ICU guard by the door did not move at all. Kessler tried again, softer now, like reason. "Commander, you are medicated. You are not aware of the full situation." Rourke's eyes narrowed. "I am aware enough to know you used your credentials to override security." Kessler's face hardened. "You have no proof." Brenda stepped forward and held up her phone. "Access logs. Time stamped. Your badge." Kessler's eyes flicked to the screen and a crack appeared, not fear, annoyance. "Those logs can be misread." Rourke's voice cut through the room, still quiet. "They can be verified. By NCIS." The words landed. The first real shift in Kessler's posture. Her shoulders tightened. Her breathing changed. A radio crackled in the ICU hall, louder now. 2 suspects detained in radiology. 1 restrained. 1 at large. Admin involvement confirmed. Kessler's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she tried to mask it. Rourke's gaze never left her. "You are done." Kessler's voice sharpened. "You are a patient in my facility." Rourke's reply was immediate. "And you are a suspect in my investigation." The door behind Kessler opened again, and 2 officers stepped in, plain clothes, badges visible. 1 flashed credentials quickly to the ICU guard, who stepped aside without hesitation. "Marianne Kessler," one officer said, "you need to come with us." Kessler's face shifted into outrage. "You cannot do this." The second officer's voice was calm. "We can." Kessler turned her head toward her security officers. "Do something." They did not move. The first officer reached for her wrist. Kessler pulled back, then stopped when the ICU guard's hand touched his radio and his stance widened. The room had chosen. Kessler's hands were cuffed. The sound was small. The silence afterward was not. As she was led out, her eyes snapped to Ava. There was no apology there. Only calculation and anger, like Ava was not a person, just a problem that had refused to disappear. Brenda watched her go jaw tight. Rourke exhaled, pain flickering across his face as the adrenaline faded. He glanced at Ava. "You are hurt." Ava looked down at her sleeve. "Not mine." Rourke's eyes held hers. "They called you lieutenant." Ava's throat tightened. "They should not have." Rourke's voice stayed steady. "They recognized you." Ava did not answer. She stood with her hands clasped lightly at her waist, keeping the tremor controlled. Stillness tried to make it return. She refused to let it. Outside the ICU, the hospital moved into full lockdown. Officers moved through halls, checking doors, collecting weapons, separating staff from suspects. The remaining armed man was found in a stairwell and detained without a shot, fired, pinned by numbers, disarmed by training that matched his own. Downstairs, Dr. Grant Mercer was stopped at the trauma floor entrance by an officer who did not care about his white coat. "This is ridiculous," Mercer snapped. "I am in the middle of an MCI." The officer's tone stayed even. "You are needed for a statement." Mercer tried to push past. The officer stepped in front of him, unmoving. Mercer's eyes flashed. "Do you know who I am?" The officer looked at his badge. "Not my problem." Mercer's gaze darted across the floor and landed on Ava through the glass of the ICU corridor. Ava met his eyes for a moment, calm, unreadable. Mercer's jaw worked, anger and humiliation tangling into something he could not name. Then he looked away first. Hours blurred. Statements were taken. Footage was copied. Access logs were pulled and verified. Nurses spoke in careful voices describing patterns they had learned to ignore. Paramedics gave timelines. Compliance staff arrived looking pale, like they had finally seen the monster in their own basement. Ava sat in a small interview room with a plainclothes investigator and a hospital lawyer who looked like she wished she were anywhere else. Ava's hands trembled faintly on the table. She kept them flat, fingers spread, showing she had nothing to hide. The investigator slid a printed access log across the table. "You were suspended mid-response. Who delivered the suspension?" "Marianne Kessler," Ava said. The investigator nodded and wrote, "Did anyone instruct you to leave the building?" "Yes." "Did you comply?" Ava met his eyes. "Patients were unstable. I stayed until they were stable enough for machines to take over." The investigator's pen paused. "And then you left the floor." "Yes." The hospital lawyer cleared her throat. She acted outside chain of command. The investigator looked at the lawyer. She prevented fatalities. The lawyer's face tightened. Protocol exists for a reason. Ava's voice stayed calm. So do hands. The investigator's eyes flicked briefly to her fingers. The tremor. Not mockery, not pity. Recognition of cost. Later, when the interviews ended, Ava returned to the trauma floor in silence. Not to work. To gather her belongings. The floor looked the same as it had that morning. Just dirtier, quieter, bruised. The gurney tracks on the tile. The smeared handprints on glass. The empty wrappers from sterile packs littering bins. The smell of blood that cleaning never fully erased. Lauren stood near the nurse's station, shoulders slumped, eyes red. She saw Ava and stepped forward. "I did not help you," Lauren said, voice rough. "I watched them treat you like that." Ava's gaze held hers. "You triaged. People lived." Lauren swallowed hard. "I laughed sometimes." Ava did not flinch. "Then stop." Lauren nodded, tears threatening. "Are you leaving?" Ava picked up her tote bag from under the station. "I am going home." Brenda appeared beside them, exhaustion etched into her face, but her posture still solid. She touched Ava's shoulder once, brief and firm. "You did good work," Brenda said. Ava's throat tightened. She nodded once. "So did you." Brenda's eyes narrowed slightly, holding something unspoken. "They are moving you off trauma." Ava did not ask why. She already knew. Noise attracts people who think they own it. Brenda continued, voice low. "A quieter unit. Same pay. Different politics." Ava nodded. "Okay." Brenda held her gaze. "You have somewhere to go," Ava answered simply. "Yes." Brenda let out a breath she had been holding since the dispatch call. "Good." Ava walked out through the employee corridor and into the cold evening air. The sky over Norfolk was bruised purple, the kind of dusk that made the shipyard cranes look like silhouettes from a different world. Police lights still flashed at the entrance, painting the hospital glass in pulsing blue and red. Ava reached her car and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Her hands trembled as soon as the stillness claimed her. She pressed her palms against the steering wheel and breathed until the shaking eased enough to turn the key. She drove home. Days passed, then weeks. Tidewater Trauma Center returned to its normal rhythm on the surface. The lobby screens played the same cheerful footage. The coffee still tasted like burnt water. People still walked fast and talked louder than they needed to. But certain names disappeared from the board. Certain faces did not return. Ava's new unit was on the 7th floor, a step down from the theater of trauma. Fewer alarms, more long nights, less swagger. The kind of work that did not attract applause, but kept people alive anyway. On her first morning there, she arrived early as always. The hallway smelled faintly of clean linen. Sunlight angled through a narrow window and laid a soft rectangle across the floor. Ava washed her hands at the sink, slow and methodical. Soap, scrub, rinse, dry. She looked up at her reflection for a moment, not to search for emotion, just to confirm she was present. In the break room, she poured herself coffee. The cup filled, the liquid stayed still. Ava paused, noticing the absence of the tremor, like you noticed silence after a long day of noise. Her fingers held the cup steady without effort. She did not smile wide. She did not celebrate. She simply let the moment exist, small and real, then lifted the cup and took a sip. Down the hall, a call light blinked. A patient needed something. Ava set the cup down and walked toward the door, her steps quiet, her posture steady. When she passed the nurse's station, a new nurse looked up, nervous, clutching a chart too tightly. Ava recognized the tension in her shoulders, the fear of being judged before being known. Ava stopped and spoke gently. "You are on room 12 today." The new nurse nodded quickly. "Yes, I am trying to keep up." Ava's voice stayed calm. "Ask if you do not know. Do not guess." The new nurse exhaled as if permission had been granted. "Okay." Ava continued down the hall to room 12 and knocked once before entering, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Inside, the patient turned his head and watched her approach. Ava checked the IV line, adjusted the blanket, and asked the questions that mattered. Her hands stayed steady as long as she worked. And when the unit fell quiet again, when the world tried to settle into stillness, Ava kept moving one task to the next, not to outrun memory, but to give it a place to rest.